Jim Bridger, Part 9. On no occasion would Bridger trust an Indian. He maintained that a rattlesnake was of some good, but that an Indian was good for nothing. He prided himself on the fact that anything an Indian could do, he could outdo the Indian. While Bridger had an ample caution, he also had the courage of a lion. One of the best stories related about Bridger, which well illustrates the wonderful knowledge he possessed of the Rocky Mountains, is told in connection with the building of the Union Pacific Railroad. It appears that the engineers running the survey were in consultation at Denver as to the most feasible point to build the line across the Rockies. The consultation became a wrangle, and no tangible agreement could be arrived at. Finally, somebody suggested to them that Jim Bridger knew more about the Rocky Mountains than any other living man and could easily tell them the best point to run the line. It was thereupon decided to consult the famous mountaineer. Bridger happened to be in St. Louis at the time on business. Communication was at once opened with him, although the real object under discussion was withheld from him. But he was urged to start for Denver immediately, as his advice was needed on some very important matters. A railway pass was forwarded, and about 2 weeks later in walked the grizzled frontiersman. Then the engineers started to talk. They told old Jim what they wanted, and as the plans were laid out before him and the query propounded as to where he considered the best point to run the line across the mountains, a look of supreme disgust began to show itself on his face. Excuse me. Finally, he exclaimed impatiently, "Give me a sheet of paper." A large sheet of clean manila was laid before him on the table. Reaching into the stove for a dead coal, the old man remarked as he started to make some lines, "I could have told you fellers just where to run your line without even leaving St. Louis and saved you the expense of bringing me way out here." An outline of the Rockies was quickly traced on the sheet, showing mountain peaks in profusion. Pointing to a particular one, Bridger remarked, "Right there is where you fellers can run your line to get across the Rockies, and nowhere else. Not unless you want to do a hull of a lot more digging and blasting than you care to tackle." The engineers were amazed at the old man's confident assertion, but when they came to run their line across the range, the road crossed the Rockies in the exact spot Bridger had pointed out to them. It is stated that the crude map he made is yet preserved by the Railroad Corporation. F.G. Burnett of Fort Washakie, Wyoming, is also among those yet living in 1920 who knew Jim Bridger intimately. He writes to the authors, "Jim Bridger was a remarkable old man and had a wonderful memory. He seemed never to forget a trail that he had ever traveled or the distance between streams or watering places, whether good water or bad, and also whether there was wood, and if there was good feed for the stock. So we always knew what sort of camp the one ahead would be and what kind of country we would have to travel over in order to reach it. His eyesight was failing when I knew him, so that he could not shoot very good, and he would always swear at us if we got a shot at an Indian and missed him, remarking that he never missed one when he was our age. He was devoid of fear and rarely talked of his exploits in history, and history has lost many a thrilling adventure by his indifference to publicity. He was a great friend of Chief Washakie of the Shoshones. They were about the same age and had many hair-raising experiences together. If he was cornered and asked to talk, he would tell the most outlandish yarns and then chuckle to himself and wonder if his questioner had gotten what he wanted. For his first wife, Bridger married the daughter of a Flathead chief. The date of this marriage is not given, but the wife died in 1846. There were 2 children by this union, Felix and Josephine, and both were educated in St. Louis. Felix served throughout the Civil War in the 2nd Missouri Artillery and was on the plains with Custer fighting the Indians in Texas and the Indian Territory. This son died in 1876 on his father's farm near Little Santa Fe, Missouri. Bridger married for his second wife a Ute woman. She died July the 4th, 1849, at the birth of her child. The little one was named Virginia, and Bridger is said to have brought her up on buffalo's milk. She married a man named Washkman after receiving an education in the convent at St. Louis, where she attended school with her half-sister, Josephine. Bridger married again in 1850 a woman of the Snake tribe, and soon after that bought a small farm near Little Santa Fe, Missouri, removing thence with his family from Fort Bridger the same year. There were 2 children by this marriage, Mary, born in 1853, and William in 1857. The wife died in 1858. Bridger was out on one of his numerous trapping trips at the time of her death, but soon after he returned to his farm, where he remained until 1862, when the government again sent for him to guide troops across the plains. For 8 years he was thus employed, but about 1870 his health began to decline, and in 1871 he moved back to his farm again. Of the last years of his life, his daughter, Mrs. Washman, says, "In 1873, Father's health began to fail him, and his eyes were very bad, so that he could not see well, and the only way he could distinguish a person was by the sound of their voice. In 1874, his eyesight was leaving him very fast, and this worried him much. At such times, he would get very nervous and wanted to be on the go all the time. I had to watch him and lead him around to please him. Finally, I got him a gentle old horse so he could ride around and have some way of passing the time. We had a dog that always accompanied him. While Father could not see very well, the faithful old horse would guide him along as he rode around the farm. Sometimes the horse would go wrong and they would get lost in the woods. Then the dog would come home and begin to bark, and then we knew something was the matter. The dog would whine around until I'd go out and find Father and lead him back home. Occasionally he would take the dog and cane in hand, would go out to the wheat field to see how the crop was growing. Father would get there and get down on his hands and knees and feel for the wheat, and that was the way he passed the time. He wished so much that he could regain his eyesight so he could again see the mountains and go back to them. He would long so much to see his old companions and have a chat with them of the old times away back in the 50s. Again, he would have a great desire to see some of his old friends connected with the Army, and would say, "I'd give anything in the world if I could see some of them and have a talk of the olden times, but I know I will not be able to see any of my old-time mountain friends anymore, as I know that my time is near. I feel that my health is failing me fast and that I am not the same as I used to be." At the time of his death, Bridger was living in a long 2-story building. Later, the people in the neighborhood called it the haunted house and would not go near the place. Colonel E.B.C. Judson, who years ago used to write Blood and Thunder dime novels of the West under the nom de plume of Ned Buntline, hunted Bridger up in the latter days of his life to get material for a series of Western novels with Bridger as the chief figure. Judson was given facts enough about the great plainsman to keep him busy writing for years. Bridger and Colonel Judson became fast friends, and the noted story writer accompanied him on one of his last trips to the mountains. Soon after this, the series of Jim Bridger stories were started. They appeared once a week in a popular publication, and Bridger's companions used to save them up and read them to him. It was this same Judson who some years later made Buffalo Bill a popular Western hero in much the same manner. End of Part 9.